one of the things that I've noticed in this movement was there's been people who have tried to be leaders, but they were not necessarily leaders before they had this event take place in their life. And now all of a sudden, they're put in this position that they've never been in. They don't have the experience. So today I want to talk about leadership. And I think the conference is a lot about leadership. And I'll be presenting a model that you may choose to take some ideas from, and you may not. And I'd like to kind of talk about what success is. What does it look like? And frankly, I'm not exactly sure in this movement what success actually looks like. Now, is it numbers? Is it having 500 people on a mailing list? Is it having 200 people on a forum? Is it having 15 people come to a meeting? So what is success in this movement? And we're going to talk a little bit about that. There's some common, I wrote down some common assumptions and common denominators that I thought that I could maybe represent each of you, no matter if you're an offender, ex-offender, or a family member or friend or loved one of an offender. The common denominators, the first one is that when I was growing up and as a child, I did not have on my list of life goals to be a sex offender. I did not plan on being considered a monster by my society. It was not part of my life plan. I went to college. I graduated from college. I went to work. And this just definitely was not part of the plan. It was not part of your loved one's plan, I'm sure. So that's one thing we have in common. The second thing we might have in common, I already alluded to, and that is that we might not have thought that we were ever going to be a leader of something. And how many of you are leaders either of your state chapter or you help in your state? I know you. So we have a number of people that are leaders, okay? And I don't know how many of you thought you would be a leader of something, and you probably did not think you'd be a leader of something like this. So that's another thing we have in common. The next thing, and this is why I think you're here, you want to make your tragedy or your loved one's tragedy their mission to try to fix, to try to make a difference. I had an attorney tell me a few years ago, and he didn't work necessarily with sex offenders, he worked with offenders, any kind of offender. He's in Glen Burnie, Maryland. And I remember him telling me, Barry, you need to make this your cause for life, your purpose for life after going through this. It needs to be what you do. You need to be at the forefront of leading this and use your experience. Now, tell me this though, it is not the most pleasant experience to be a leader of something that was so embarrassing, so filled with shame, so put down by society. So now somebody's suggesting that I be a poster child for something that most people would not want anyone to know about. Well, guess what? We could make posters for each of you, and your picture's on it. Yep. So you're the poster children for this cause, for this movement. That's another common denominator. I guess we could call it, if you're a leader, it might be leadership by default. Leadership by default. And for most of us, the next point that we have in common is the biggest concern that we probably have about this whole thing is that we want there to be closure. We want there to be an ending in our lives so that we can move on. So that's another thing we have in common. And then the next thing is, my grandma was really, really off the charts. My dad's mom, slightly crazy, I think, and maybe it's gone down a few generations too. My grandmother she was the one that would start laughing when nothing was funny and have everybody laughing. She was the one that would stand out at the supermarket and people are walking into the store and she would be looking up like there was something to look at. And then she would watch people and laugh at them as they stopped and they looked up to see what she was looking at. Most people are followers, not leaders. We have a few people that venture out in business, but most people work for somebody. So most people are followers. So, but you're leaders. You're leaders in a very unpopular journey. So that we have that in common. I became familiar with this movement. I don't even remember how. But I remember I probably Googled and probably found RSOL. And then I talked to, he says he's from Ohio, but really he's from Virginia, right? Yeah.
No, I was actually...
You're James Madison, right?
Yes.
Yes, so you're from Virginia? Yes, okay. Ask his wife Dolly.
Yes.
So,
she's on the donut.
oh, okay. So, I've been to your home. I went to college right near your home in Virginia. I talked with Mr. Madison on the phone. It was Sosin's hotline, I believe. And I was just so tired, as all of us are, of being on this thing. And I remember it was just encouraging to talk to someone, even if it was him. And I remember I decided it was time to get away from this. Legally, get away from this. So I decided to leave the country. So I gave my 3 days notice to the state. And I was on an airplane from Baltimore. It was in December. But before I left, I got a visit from someone who must be a direct descendant of Adolf Hitler. And unfortunately and ironically, in the same place where we had a tragedy of a young girl in Maryland a couple years ago, which propelled this whole more legislation, more laws. He came over and he threatened to lock me up if I didn't register, because I was supposed to register in 2 weeks from that time that I was leaving. And if I didn't register, he was going to keep me going out of this country. I said, I will no longer be in your jurisdiction. I've given all the proper notification of where I'm going and my itinerary, and I will not have to register. Of course, he was the one with the gun, not me. So we didn't get into any altercation, but frankly, I wished I felt like it. But instead, I called the director of the registry and I was crying. I said, I am a human being. So I was driving down the road on a Friday, leaving on a Saturday, and I get pulled over by one of the friendly police officers in that county, and you know what happened next. Next thing you know, there's marked, unmarked, state, county, and I don't know who else, but there's about a dozen or 14, I think I counted, cars around my RV. I was driving my RV and someone was driving my car. I would pull behind RV. So finally, the Mr. Hitler guy came and he said, your neighbors called us and said that you have a child in your RV. Well, a child had never been in my RV, and even if a child had been in my RV, there would have been nothing against the law about that. I'm not on probation. And so they wanted to search my RV. So after talking a while, he said, look, I don't need a search warrant because in the circumstances, I can just look in your RV. And so I said, okay, just you are going in, you can join me, we'll go in there and look in the RV. Anyway, I ended up getting to leave, of course. The next day I flew to Florida I'm glad I didn't stay there long. Less than 12, I don't know, about 12 hours or something. And then I flew south. I wish I would have flown to Cuba, but I flew, you can't fly to Cuba though from here. I flew to the Dominican Republic, where I already had set up, I had 2 employees down there with my business, running my business, my American business in the Caribbean. And an apartment already set up. I had everything set up, and I wasn't planning on coming back because I'm so disappointed in my country. And so I made the mistake of calling because they kept harassing my friends where my RV was parked. And they went over there and they wanted to search my RV and they wanted to know where I was at. They already knew where I was at. They didn't think I was there, so they were putting emails out in bulletins to find me. So I better make this story shorter because it could go on for a while and we need to get to some other stuff. But I ended up making a mistake of going into the embassy to prove that I was there. They kept my passport. I came back a couple of days later, and then they kept me. And they said, you're going to have to go back to the United States. And I told them I'd rather go to Cuba. And it wasn't very far away either. And I thought Castro would probably be nicer. So I had to fly back, expecting to be arrested for something that I didn't know I had done. And I wasn't. I got so depressed, I ended up calling you again. In fact, I called you from that airport in Florida.
Call me from Dominican Republic.
I called you from there too.
Jeez.
And
I told him to hang himself, but he obviously didn't.
no, the rope wouldn't hold me. So I come back, and of course my world just got turned upside down. I had spent thousands of dollars on 1-year lease on an apartment and thousands of dollars on furnishing this place, you know, and I had to come back. I was in bed for about a month. I had hives from here down to my waist, the nerves. I couldn't believe this was happening. And so I had to rebuild a lot of things again, over nothing this time. The first time, yeah, it made sense. I did something wrong. I didn't do something wrong this time. That kind of catapulted me to this movement. I says, we got to do something about this. And so because of how it affected me personally, and that's what's happened to you, you've been catapulted into this movement. You from your plumber, you from a family member perhaps, you from yourself. So we've been catapulted into this thing that we'd rather not be in. And you know what? We shouldn't be on those. I mean, that's the way they have it. I began Brenda Jones, who I think you know, on the RSOL admin team. She would call me and get me out of bed. And we would meet, and I would just start sharing ideas with Brenda. And she would take notes. And that's how we began organization. I don't know what success is entirely, but we have, I think, we had about 500 or 600 phone calls when we sent out a postcard. We sent out 3,500 postcards and we had about 600 people call. Just a simple postcard. Then we started groups within counties, and now we have 8 in our state, and we only have 21 counties. We're not like Ohio and some of the other places that have a gazillion.
Iowa's got 9.
Yeah, California. So we started by county, setting up this organization. But we started with our leadership, okay? And that's what we're going to talk about today is establishing, setting up your leadership on the state level. Because I think probably when I started looking at this movement, not so much any particular group, but this movement in general, the thing I noticed was there was a lot of people trying, but we weren't pulling it together. And so I said, we've got to try to pull this thing together. We need to pull it together nationally. We need to pull it together within our states. And then when I met with you and Tammy in Washington, D.C. a few months ago, yeah, and I listened to them, and they were like, okay, there's 20-some thousand people on this list, and they get you know, a handful of people to even respond to anything out of 20-some-thousand. And I'm like, what's going on? So, and I don't think, it's not necessarily something they're not doing or doing, I don't think. I don't know what it is. I really don't understand it. But we're going to try to share some things that maybe will help you. And you can ask questions as we go through this if you'd like.
Barry, I think one of the reasons that people are hesitant to get involved is because I know in Maryland we all have to go through 104 weeks of classes and at one of the psychological centers. And I completed mine 4 years ago or whatever, but we are told in those classes, it is drummed into you constantly, stay below the radar. Don't make waves, just stay out of sight, do whatever you have to do. If you see an accident, don't even try to help the people, just drive right by. I mean, we're told these things in these classes. Just avoid everybody, avoid everything. Oh, we're even told not to be in the same room with another SO. Okay, we're told that you can't work with them, you can't be in the same room with them, you can't meet them for lunch, nothing. Stay away, stay away, stay under the radar. And that is drummed into you for 2 years.
Okay, so that's a good reason that people wouldn't want to gather together. And so we've kind of turned that on its head, though, in Maryland to a great degree by what we're doing.
But I'm from Maryland too.
Yeah, I know you are. You got it drilled in your head, but we are hitting that head on.
But I mean, the reason they have a handful out of 27,000 is because of one word only. And I live that hell. It's called shame.
Yeah.
That's it.
If you think
and it's time to speak out.
I think it's a little bigger than that too. I mean, my PO, you know, I thought I was, you know, I guess for me, by people have been telling me I've broken all the rules. I got a fairly light sentence on a first-degree felony. I got a judicial release. I got an early release from prison. So, you know, I don't know some accidental test case or what, but my PO when I got home said, "Don't be in an elevator with a woman. Don't be, you know, don't be in public with anyone that you don't know. Don't answer the phone."
So don't live.
Yeah, I mean,
Don't live. Just shoot yourself.
just you know, go in your hole and stay there, and I'll come tell you when it's safe. Was kind of the message I was getting, you know, and you know, he went so far as to tell me he didn't believe my story, didn't believe anything about me, that that I wasn't going to successfully complete my probation period, which was going to be absolutely 5 years no matter what. And so, I mean, there's a lot of fear-mongering that goes on in the system. I mean, this, you know, I think we all know the system.
Which I think that was...
And every county in our state is different. They all have their own rules, which is wrong.
Every officer in our county has his own rules.
Yeah.
I mean,
Even the probation officers have their own rules.
Yeah,
That's right.
I'm on my third PO, and each time the rules are different. Each
So,
time, you know,
I guess the question is, how do we harness all of this rage into productive direction? I gather that's what Barry's talking about, developing a really organized
You need to
approach.
stay calm, and knowledge is power. Be informed as best as
Let
possible.
me go through a few more things. I appreciate your observations. And it has to start with leadership on the state level. You need to figure out if you're the leader in your state, then you need to pull together a team. You don't win very many basketball games by one person making all the shots or one person making all the home runs. And so you have to start with leadership. And you can become a leader even if you don't have those skills naturally. It helps a lot if you're naturally somebody that is a leader, but you don't have to. And a good example of that is Brenda Jones. Brenda Jones calls herself a cat herder. She says, "I herd cats. I know how to herd cats." She does not know how to be a leader of an organization. And yet, she's, by default, in a way, she has become a leader with a lot of coaching And so if you don't know how to be a leader, it's okay, but make sure you have somebody that does, so that they can coach you, okay? When I talk about leadership systems and infrastructure are kind of almost synonymous. Listen to this quote. Have you heard of Edwards Deming, W. Edwards Deming, business consultant and guru for organizations and things, leadership? Old guy. In fact, he's dead.
It's really old.
It's really old. It is not enough to do your best. And I think probably everyone here does their best. They're trying their hardest. You must know what to do and then do your best. So what we're going to do here in our 45 minutes, I think, that we have left, is to try to know what to do and then do our best. All right? And we're going to hopefully make some sense out of what to do when we go back home. I'm curious, though, what do you think success would look like when you go back to Iowa? What would success look like in Iowa when you go back to California, when you go back to Kentucky, when you go back to Maryland, Ohio, right? And you're Missouri, apparently.
It's just little steps, little success steps.
But what is it? What does it look like? What does success look like in this movement, this cause? Just really brief answers.
The abolishment of the registry. That's success to me.
Well, doing away with this registry.
No small steps, man. I'm gonna take one big huge plunge.
Eliminating residency requirements.
Eliminating residency requirements.
Get one person off the registry. Anybody.
Get somebody off of this thing. Any others?
Based laws on research. I would like to see that. If we could implement laws based on research. This would
Laws
be
based on research.
Right.
Educating the public that that it's all gray areas, there's no black and white. Everyone is a different story, and everybody now is lumped into the same category. Even murder has murder 1, murder 2, manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter, but not sex offenders. If you're caught peeing in an alley at 2 o'clock in the morning because there's no restroom open, you're a sex offender for life, the same as if you're a multiple child rapist.
Okay. I mentioned numbers. I mean, there's different ways to measure success. I like business, and I've been successful in business on different levels. Financially successful, and I had a passion for what I was doing. And to me, those were characteristics of, obviously, if it wasn't success, I would not feel happy about it. So I don't necessarily like making money. I just like the process of creating things and building something from nothing. That's what I like. And tomorrow, I hope that you can come to the WAR, Women Against Registry workshop. Paul Shannon, myself, Stuart back there, and Brenda Jones will be part of that presentation about a new organization, national organization for this movement. And the success, where does it come from? From within. Comes from within, doesn't it? My mother used to tell me for a long time, she said I could do anything if I put my mind to it. Well, it wasn't true. And then, so there were times when I felt like a failure if I couldn't do something. Well, once I learned that it was okay not to know how to do everything, then changed my definition of what success is. It was a whole lot better. When and I think probably each of you that are here, after you have committed, if you did commit the crime that you're accused of, after that's committed, when you're a pastor of a couple of churches, like I was, it was especially shame-filled and embarrassing. Because here's somebody, it didn't happen, my charges didn't happen with anyone related to my church, or churches. But the place where things are standards and morality are supposed to be up here, and the pastor going down here, it's quite a contrast. So I went from the pulpit to the prison. And I felt especially bad about this because of all of the people's lives. I mean, they went and interrogated all the children of the congregations. They had to be traumatized because of something I did, not related to the church directly, but they had to find out. And so it was especially difficult for me to have to go through. And I so much wanted to, I never made a confession to the police, even though they were yelling and throwing chairs, and I just refused to make any confession to them. And, you know, making that phone call to my mother, who was, I'm in Maryland, and my parents are out in Washington State, and my dad had just gone to Belize to leave my mother, and I didn't even know about this. So now she has her husband in Belize and a son in prison, or in jail. I didn't like to have to make that call. I didn't like to have to find out where my dad was either. So it was tough. And then to be in jail when my mother had cancer, my dad had a stroke. I have a disabled brother that they took care of. And the brother had to fly, him and his wife and family had to fly back from Japan to take care of everybody. You all know what it's like to go through the stuff when you go to the jail or you end up in prison. And but I remember my mother subscribed me to USA Today and a few other magazines or publications while I was in jail. And I remember, and this kind of goes into this internal thing where leadership, it begins internally, and your vision is something you have to have. You have to come out. That needs to come from the inside out. And I was in jail, and I read this article about a mother and a child that her son had cancer. It was terminal. They used to write letters back and forth to each other at home. And I read that article, and I says, "This is profound. Here's a little child who has cancer, and he dies. But him and his mom were exchanging letters, and it made a profound impact on both their lives. And she ended up starting an organization called Love Letters, and they give letters of encouragement, gifts to children that were terminally ill." When I read that, I said, "Okay, Barry, you're in this little cell," and at this point I broke a rule. I didn't stand up for count, and they put me in the hole, and the hole was really a hole there in Virginia. And the lights were on 24 hours a day. But it was from prison. I said, I am determined, I don't have to prove anything to anybody, but I'm determined to use my talents and my time and my energy to do to try to make something good come out of this mess. And so you have people that whine and complain and feel sorry for themselves, and I didn't want to be in that list. And so I said, I'm going to do something. My offense was related to the internet. My offense involved the mail. Now, put these together. Pastor, male victim, internet, Washington Post. Because it was publicized everywhere. It had all the ingredients for a really sensational story from the media to have fun with. And I remember I would see my picture on the news in Washington, D.C. I'm in the jail at 7 locks, which has more than 7 locks. And I'm sitting there seeing myself on TV. It's not pleasant to be sitting around a bunch of people and see your picture for this on TV. So anyway, I said, I'm going to do something. So guess what? And this is kind of an encouragement, I hope, to you. Because from inside a jail, a little jail cell, I created a national project. And since my offense involved the internet, I said, we are going to start a project, and it's going to be called Safe Cyber Institute of, not Canada, America. Well, you're America too. North America. So Safe Cyber Institute of America was born inside of a little jail cell. And guess what? I was doing radio interviews around the country. I had the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children endorse my project. I received this big, I didn't get to see this till I got out. I received this thing that was huge from President Bush and 2 letters from President Bush endorsing my project. That happened from jail. The radio interviews, I only had to wish and hope.
Did they know you were in jail at that time?
I don't think so.
Gee, that's the
He's a
question.
Republican that signed the Adam Walsh Act. If you didn't know that. So, and in fact, I was in touch with his education, Dr. James Dobson. You probably heard of him. I was on their program, Family News in Focus. And these interviews, it was interesting because I only had to hope and pray that the time that I was supposed to do the interview, that I could get the phone because there was only one phone and I was in segregation. And that somebody else didn't have the phone. But each time, I was able to get the phone. And so I'm sitting here doing radio interviews on talk shows around the country from jail. If I can do that from jail, then why in the world can't we make this thing really fly out here?
Amen.
And so that came from inside, literally inside. And that's where it needs to come from for you. It needs to come from the inside. If you've been affected by this in some way, whether you're the person on the list or not, it needs to come from the inside, and you need to have a passion about it if you're going to be a leader. A couple of the, and by the way, I had senators on the Capitol Hill endorse this project. It was really interesting. They would send me copies. I would be doing calls, and they would patch me through to people. And I had 3 staff members, on the outside. I had so much time because I was in segregation. I could do a lot of writing, so I was creating all these letters. I kept 3 people busy from jail. One was a college student. One was my father, who came back from police. A successful leader, and I'm not always given the impression that I do this, and I'll tell you why in a second, but a successful leader listens. You have to listen to people. I'm accused of not listening to people all the time. Elaine didn't think I was listening to him on a phone conversation. And if somebody disagrees with you or me, if they don't agree with us, it must be that they're not listening. Because if they were listening, they would agree, right? Of course. Yeah. I don't agree. You're not listening. So, a leader needs to listen. Now, I've had to let it be clear to some people because I have a pretty strong personality. I've had to say, look, I'm listening to what you said. I absolutely don't agree with it. And it's okay to disagree. But you do have to listen. You need to listen.
Barry,
Yeah.
not just listening. A lot of people say they're listening, but they're only half-heartedly listening.
Yeah. It needs to.
When I worked for Bell Atlantic back in the early 90s, everybody that worked for the corporation, which is now Verizon, we all had to go through a class called the Bell Atlantic Way. One of the classes that we took was called Be Here Now. And it was the best class I probably ever took while working for that company because it made us better listeners. The whole class was on how to be a good listener. And it made me a better father, it made me a better husband, it made me a better employee because too many people, when you're speaking to them, aren't giving you the full attention. They're thinking about what they have to do later on today, where they're supposed to be. They're thinking about what happened this morning. They're listening, but they're not really paying a lot of attention. And my kids would come into I remember after dinner, my one kid, my 2 sons are both Air Force pilots now, and they're good kids. But when they were growing up, I'd be watching TV after dinner or something, and they'd come running by and they'd tell me something, and they'd do this in front of my face, and they'd say, "Dad, you're not here now," because I told them all about the class. And they'd look at me and they'd say, "Are you here now? Can I talk to you now?" And I immediately knew what they were meant, and I'd take my eyes off the TV and I would devote that attention, complete attention, to them. So being a good listener involves, it's something you have to think about. It's not just something, you're not just hearing people, you're actually paying attention.
Yeah, and even if you can multitask, you need to respond appropriately to that you're listening, you're tuned in, basically. A leader also reads books, I think. And so I really like, there's not very many books actually, but 20 Powerful Lessons for Today's Leaders from America's 16th President, called Lincoln Speaks to Leaders. I got this recently because it was on sale at the Corridors.
They're behind the business.
That's why it was on sale. So this is really a good book. I've kind of skimmed through it, and really good book. I'm not going to go through each of these books, but you've probably heard of John Maxwell. And I've been to his seminars years ago when I was a pastor, because he does a lot with churches and pastors. He was a pastor himself. And so Maxwell's books are really good. And this is kind of an interesting one, if you haven't. How many have seen this book called QBQ? The Question Behind the Question? This is an interesting book. I had the opportunity to go speak to a convention of Bank of America managers. And it was after I went through a bad experience with them. And one of the vice presidents of Bank of America for the Mid-Atlantic region was the leader for this conference. And she was the one that ended up in the loop helping resolve my issue with the bank. I'd been with them since I was in college, which was 20-some years ago. And so this lady helped, and through that series of events, she said, "Barry, would you come speak about customer service things?" You know? So I didn't know it, but she recommends this to all of her managers. And so she says, "Oh, I'm glad that you're going to be talking about that." And so, question behind the question. And it's to try to not make things be blaming somebody or complaining. And it's not asking questions like why. It's asking questions like how or what. What can I do? Anyway, good book for leaders. And the last thing is, okay, listening. And there's so many things on leadership, but so listening, reading, and so that's a need. So if you are a leader and you don't know how to be a leader, learn how to be a leader and get some good books on it. Get some good books on that subject. The last thing is the leader really needs to have a vision. If you don't have a vision, what on earth are you going to do as a leader? The leader has to have a vision, right? They have to know where they're going to go, taking people, right? And so, and if you need to latch on to somebody else's vision, don't let your ego get in the way. Just latch on to it. If it's a good vision, and go for it. I like the expression, I think you've probably heard it before, and it has to do with setting goals. If you shoot for the stars, you'll land on the roof. If you shoot for the top of the roof, you won't get off the ground. Now I realize that some people live in the galaxy, and they never keep their feet on the ground. But as a leader, you need to keep your feet on the ground, but always be somewhere out there. That's vision. Where do you want to take people? Let me see what time it is. 2:50, so we got 2 more minutes. I think we started late, so does that mean we get to end late?
Yep.
I mean, we have, what, quarter after the hour? Does that sound right? Everybody's awake, even though they had a big lunch. So I couldn't eat. I have a tooth problem going on. And so, just
We're supposed to have a break between 3 and 3:30.
3 and 3:30, and we started 15 minutes late, so 3:50 we have to be out of here. And if we get done sooner, that's fine too. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is when I said something about infrastructure and systems. So we talked about leadership, and now are you with me on this? Leadership, okay, and infrastructure and systems. And have you ever noticed that if you care to go eat this, if you go through a drive-through window at McDonald's, say, Look how, I mean, you can get through a drive-through, even if there's a long line of cars, than you can if there's a couple of people sitting or standing in line in the store. Why is that? Because they have their systems down so packed that teenagers can run a McDonald's. They've put in place their systems. Guess what? If somebody hasn't told you, this movement needs to have systems in place. It needs to have structure in place. Because that's going to be the vehicle that will make it move. And if we don't make it move, well, then we're not going to get it abolished. Right? So we need to have systems and infrastructure. We created a model, and I think we're going to look at it, but I don't know how to use this thing, so we have a technical machine. You know how to make that work? Go ahead and record. Oh, so we don't, oh, it's on the other one, isn't it?
Yeah.
How does it work? It's not a Mac. I'm going to do this so you guys can all see. Yeah, so it's on the thumb drive. Okay. It's okay, because I kind of have this. Hair. What's that? Little hair. But I got no hair. I can do it. How about your hair is cool? If we don't get it, how about a crack on my butt next week? It's okay. It's okay. I'll use this if you don't get it, so okay? It's just that you're going to be able to understand that better than my handwriting. No? Okay.
21 letters encrypted.
Yeah, with
Pressing enter.
that's okay. They can.
4 capitals, 6 lowercase.
When you start, this is, remember, a state organization, how to build a strong state organization. We've kind of done things backwards by default, I think. But it's good if you have a board. And it's also very important to incorporate. And that's right. And so we set up 2 corporations in Maryland. One is for C3, 501c3, the other is for C4. And our organization is called FAIR, Families Advocating Intelligent Registries. It's kind of an oxymoron. But that's what we call our organization, FAIR. And in a year and a half that we've been going, we've seen amazing things happen. And in our legislature, and with people that are involved with this organization. And I'll tell you a couple of those things. But it's so important to have your structure in place. When you have your structure in place, then you have a vehicle for things to really zoom. You have the password, I guess.
Yeah. Sorry.
Now, I didn't make copies because I'm not that organized. And now, you'll notice it says war, Women Against Registry. And that's because in Maryland, we're changing our name from FAIR to WAR. And at least for one of our entities, we'll still have FAIR. We have FAIR Family Foundation, which is a 501c3. And then we have the legislative lobbying sort of wing, which will be a C4. And it will be called Women Against Registry. And you're going to, again, in a commercial, come tomorrow morning, I think it is, to Paul Shannon's workshop about this. And this, don't confuse this with anything from the past, because I don't even know anything about the past, about war, about the movement that existed, I guess, a few years ago. Okay? So, I don't need to go to that yet. But I do want to show you, oh, that's the wrong slide. Stuart, I hope you're, how do you use this thing?
Click on the next
I'm trying to get,
Start slideshow.
okay. Can you make that bigger? Yeah. Good. Okay, I want you to look at this because this is our
Go up to slideshow and hit the current slide. Go up to slideshow.
I'm just hoping you'll be able to see it.
Slideshow. And then hit current slide. That one over. Right there, from current
From
slide,
current
not from
slide.
beginning. There you go.
There we go. Oh.
I didn't like it.
Sure.
End of slideshow.
Go back. Do it again from current slide. I think you did something. Okay, now.
Keep your hands off.
Yeah.
Keep your hands on.
Okay. All right. Hopefully you can see this. This is actually our working model.
Can't see these.
Oh.
You're a better drawing.
Good Lord.
Board of Directors. We actually do have a Board of Directors. There's 2 people. It's not because we want it to be that way. It's because it's that way right now. I'm a board member, and there's another gentleman that's a board member. We have an executive director. In our case, it's Brenda Jones. And then we have somebody that's an assistant and an admin assistant. Now, basically, there's on the state level, there's actually 4 key roles. One is the executive director, the other is a resource director, a membership director, and a secretary treasurer. So we feel that that's what you need to have at least. And you don't want it to get too much bigger because it becomes impractical. So and by the way, these are 4 people that get along most of the time. I mean, we can hug after we disagree, but we get along with each other, which is a key thing for an organization. Now, the resource director, you can kind of guess what that is. We've been by county. Remember, we're set up by county. So we've set this structure up by county. We have what's called a group facilitator. We have a resource coordinator, a social coordinator, and a treasurer. So you see the similarities between here and here? So we have on the state level an equivalent of each person that's down here. All right? The social coordinator. We had a picnic. Where I live, we have a nice pool in the backyard. And so I had people over to my place. We had, about 15 people come over for that. Then we had a picnic at the National Forest. We reserved you were there, Gary.
Yep.
We reserved a picnic area at the National Forest.
It was wonderful.
We had 40-some people there.
And more food and drink than we could.
We couldn't eat it all. Men, women, and children. It was wonderful. People liked it more than they do their own family reunions. I wonder why.
It's easy.
Yeah, no arguing.
And there would have been more people had not everybody been told to stay away from other sex offenders. You're not supposed to, to be with them. And that gets out of people's heads.
So we have somebody. We have a lady that's here with us. I think we have 9 people from Maryland here. And one of the ladies created, or she's going to have a social at her house, and it's by county, and she's the treasurer of that group, and she was showing me the announcement that they're going to send out. And so do social things. We're going to have some of the social things you have to do that's just for adults, and it's because some people can't be around kids. And so it's okay, do some of those, but do some that everybody can come to, or at least the majority of people can come to. One of the things I noticed in this movement is people have kind of really riveted their attention around legislative and legislative stuff. I don't think that, I think we need to fuse something, and that is fusing what people need and the other component, the legislative component. And what do I mean by that? Well, I was talking with somebody in a southern state who is a leader of some things there in this movement, and they said 90-some% of our calls are people needing work, people needing to know where they can live, that kind of stuff, okay? If I'm thirsty, don't hand me a candy bar. So if I'm hot, don't hand me, or don't give me a heater, So we need to give people what they need. They need work. I did my last job, Dale probably knows this, I got my CDL license, and because I couldn't work as a pastor anymore. I got my CDL license, and so I was driving bus. We did a bunch of government contracts, and Department of the Interior, Department of Defense, just every, even George Mason University, which was a state college. And I was there 2.5 years. A couple of months before they let me go, I had won the Driver of the Month award and some money. But guess what? I was doing a job for the White House, for President Bush's people. And I was taking, it was an ambassador type of trip to Colombia. I don't know what they were doing down there, but anyway. It was a bunch of congressmen and women. So maybe I do know what they were doing. Anyway, so I picked up these people, and we had the Capitol Police, and we had Secret Service, and first time I'd ever known that I was that close and actually talking to the guy that has a little wire in his ear. And so we paraded out of that town at a pretty swift speed in our bus, went through the entrance that the president comes through at Andrews Air Force Base, and out to the tarmac of Andrews Air Force Base with these important people. That was on a Friday. We went and did the same thing on Sunday when they got back from their drug deal down there in Colombia. This is on tape, isn't it? And on Monday, there was a knock. I lived in an RV on company property, right outside of Washington, D.C. And I get a knock on my door. I was kind of tired after taking those important people, so I slept in. But I got a knock on my door on Monday morning. It was the big boss of the company. It was a big company, one of the biggest transportation companies on the East Coast. And I had worked for the NFL. I took Phil Donahue somewhere in a vehicle. I mean, we were doing high-profile people, important customers. And I ended up learning that I'm being terminated, and I have to move my RV off of the company property immediately. So I lost my job, and I lost my place to live. So I became homeless and jobless all in the same conversation. And so I wondered why. Well, somebody in the office had seen my picture on the registry, and she made a big deal about it. And guess what? This is what's so funny about this. You realize that when you do these kind of jobs that I would do, I was near the NSA and stuff, 4 days a week, and going through security stuff, but going down to a place in Georgia, Fort Benning. And do you know what you have to do when you're transporting these people? You have to go through a background check. Well, guess what? I was cleared to take these people. And yet they still fired me. It didn't matter. They knew that they were going to fire me before I did this job with these VIPs, but they couldn't fire me until I did it because they didn't have time to get anybody else cleared to do the job. So, anyway, I got fired, and it was at that point that I said, I need to have my own business. And so that's when I created my business. And I'm going to talk, Paul has asked me to talk about it because I can hire people anywhere in the country. And I like to hire sex offenders, you see. And so I'm in Maryland, I'm putting as many people to work as I can. And I love it. I almost feel like I'm bucking the system. And if the registry office calls me, then that'll even be fun. Or more fun, whatever.
Correct language, yes.
Yes. So, we only have a few more minutes. So,
And you're doing that currently?
I'm doing that.
Currently, right?
Yes.
Now? Okay.
I have 20-some employees, and
Can you hire from
at
prison?
least one is in this room. What?
Can you hire from prison?
I can't hire from prison. No. But wouldn't be able to do that.
You have a website and information for that too?
I'm going to present it. Paul Shannon wants me.
okay.
I have 3 businesses, and any of them Any of them can be done nationally. Huh?
Yeah, I got an application with that.
I'll be putting, it's going to be online to go there. And so,
I hired a sex offender also. He's been with me 4 years now. He's the best employee I have. He was told by his facilitator while he was still in class, which by the way, the class is supposed to be 104 weeks, 2 years. He was in for over 3 years, as is everybody else in his group, because I'm in the worst county in America for sex offenders. And that's a fact, by the way. And they don't let you out of the
you're in
class.
Wacomico.
Yes, the worst. You knew her.
I could challenge you on that.
Okay.
but I won't.
Anyway, they are told that you can't work for a sex offender. You can't be in the same room. You can't do this. You can't do that. And he's been told over and over and over again, you know, that I'm going to bring him down. I'm going to get him arrested again. I'm going to do this. He's been working for me for 4 years. Great employee, very loyal, never misses a day. And I had to call his facilitator at the psychological institute that he was getting his classes from and threatened to have her fired because she wouldn't let him out of the class, and it was holding up my business because we had to get back a certain time 1 day a week so that he could spend 2 hours in his class, whatever. And I said, this is ridiculous. You've been in 3 years. He says, yeah, but some of the guys in my group have been in 5 years. She won't let anybody out of a 2-year program. She won't let anybody out. She says, none of us are rehabilitated. Yeah, it's money. It's all state money going into it, and they are afraid to let anybody out of the class. But I went over her head, and that's when she really came down hard on me that, you know, I'm going to get him in trouble because I got him out of the class. You know, but anyway, for 4 years, it's worked out just fine.
Okay.
So yeah, we make very good employees.
Yes, that's true. I haven't had any problem with, I've had problems with other types of offenders. I've not had problems with ex-sex offenders. And so, and I'm not afraid to take the risk to hire them if I believe all the statistics. And so, one of the things in closing here, the last few minutes, is we establish your state leadership. Get your state leadership established, your team of people that you're working with. And then, whether it be by county or some region, I mean, you have to figure out what's best. When I talk with you, you know, you're so spread out, so you have to do it maybe differently. We have meetings once a month for the people. And what we discovered is that while many of them are afraid to be, not just the association, but it's reminding us what this, you know, that we're on this list. So, but we always meet in public places. We meet at Denny's, we meet at Panera Bread, wherever. We have public locations that we meet, usually restaurants, Bob Evans, a good one. And we meet once a month. We have a format, and for those of you that will want it, like, we will be, I didn't prepare any written materials, but we do have them. And so, but I'd rather give it to people that are serious about using this kind of model. And if you're not, then I don't want to waste the tree.
Barry,
So,
I did bring stuff with.
You
Stuff
brought
in my
things?
room, but I
Okay.
have charts and I have the table tents that we put out
Okay.
and things like that from our.
We have, thank you for bringing that, thank you for mentioning that. We have up to 15 people oftentimes coming out to the meetings. And so they've gone very well. We have, it's really neat because you begin to make friendships with other people on this. All of a sudden, the isolation, I have a person that's coming, and he used to be a school teacher. The other day I hired him, and it just kind of almost chokes me up. Not that I hired him. It chokes me up that he said, "You mean I can really work for you?" And it just, you know, he's so shell-shocked by what he's been through that he couldn't believe somebody was actually accepting him. Letting him work, you know, and he did a job for me today, in fact. And, you know, he needed to be able to have money, and I'm so glad he's working. He has created, can we go to another slide? Because I just want to show you, in our groups, we have a format that we follow, okay? And you can follow it or you don't have to, but we have a format that we follow. This school teacher created what we're introducing to our groups after people kind of, you know, we don't talk about the past, we don't let people talk about the crime, because we don't really care what it was. It was in the past, right? Doesn't matter. And so we let people talk, but it needs to be about the things that are affecting them now on this registry. So they share with that, but you can only do that so long, especially if you get the same people coming back, right? So we're starting to add something more to our meetings, and we have lessons, you might say, and this one here I brought is on a book club. And it's what, we can just kind of go through this real quick because I know I need to wrap up. But related to this whole issue of sex, we keep going. And so we're going to bring books, and then we're going to talk about them, and share, and learn. And so that's one of the things. He's written 13 lessons. So, and we have meetings once a month, so we have a whole year of lessons that we'll be able to use. And as I mentioned a little while ago, if you don't bring things like this in, and the social interaction from people who have been so shut out, maybe from their own family, then, and you just make it a legislative or lobbying sort of effort, I don't think it's going to work. And if it does, it's not going to work for very long.